And welcome back. All right. So I have this little device. You plug it in. So this is an extension cord. You plug it into the wall, and then you plug something into it. This is called a kilowatt. You can get this at Harbor Freight. You can get it on Amazon. They're pretty cheap, like 20 bucks. This is what's really cool about this. When you first plug it in, so you can see the voltage. All right, cool. We're at 119 volt, so almost 120. You can see the amount of current. We don't care that much about voltage or current. What we care about is watts, because watts makes everything easy. We have watts. Ignore VA. If you hit it again and go to VA, ignore that. We don't care about hertz. Okay, it's 60 hertz. We don't care about the power factor. Ignore those. All we care about is watts, and look at this. Kilowatt hours. This is a summing. It's going to sum the amount of power you use on something. So let's plug in this cheap little heater and see how much power it pulls. And then we'll show you how over time you can get. I'll show you how to use this. All right, so I've got the heater plugged in, and I'm just going to turn on just the fan. Let's point it that way. Let's move it away so that it's not so loud. All right, with just the fan on, we're pulling about 20 watts. Okay? It's not that powerful of a fan. And 20 watts. One thing that you should know about solar and stuff is that when you plug things into the wall, you have an enormous amount of energy at your disposal to do whatever. And it's cheap. It's really cheap. For every 1,000 watt hours here in Utah, it's like 8 cents. So cheap. We use a ton of power in our first world country. If you're considering being prepared for like an emergency or grid down scenario, you need to think really small. Because if you want to be able to power things with the same amount of availability like you can when you plug into the wall, you're going to need a lot of solar panels, and you're going to need a big battery bank, and you're going to need a huge inverter to be able to power all the things you want. So, pulling about 18 watts, but if I go over here, it hasn't added anything up yet. It's not big enough. So, let's turn it up. Let's turn on the first heater. So power is increasing, 350, 370, 380, 400. It's increasing because the coils are heating up, and that makes them pull more energy, and it'll eventually flatten out. So we've got, this is on heat setting number 1. So 550, 560, 570. The rate of increase is going down. We'll say it's probably going to be around 6 or 650 watts. Okay. Now, that's not that hot. And now I turn it on the second setting. And now we're pulling 1,100 watts or so. Probably peak at 1,200, something like that. But what I wanted to show you, we're starting to accumulate. If I were to leave this on all night and come back in the morning, this would be something big. And I've done this actually on my freezer. So this is why I want to show you this. There's two things you need to know. You need to know what is the instantaneous amount of power I'm pulling, okay? When a freezer's on, how much power does it actually take to run it? Freezers are a little different. Also, you need to add probably 30% to this running total, maybe even 50%. Because when freezers first turn on, any inductive motor, basically any motor that plugs into the wall, it'll have a surge of current, like a spike at first. And that can overload inverters. So anyway, look at, all right, well, my needs are 1,200 watts. I was actually pretty close. Oh, this is a heater. Sorry. I don't remember how much power my freezers are outside. I want to say they were like 500 watts a piece, maybe. So if I was running off of a 2 kilowatt, 2000 watt inverter, it could handle this single load of this heater. By the way, I do not recommend ever using your electricity for heat. If you're in a grid down situation, unless you've got just a ton of excess power, don't use your power for heat ever. You can always burn wood for heat. Power in a grid down scenario is precious. Electricity. So if I got a 2000 watt inverter, it'll handle this just fine. So how do I tell what the average amount of power is that a fridge is going to use? So it'll cycle on, and then it'll cycle off. And then it'll cycle on, and it'll cycle off. So the power usage will go up and down. So if I look at watts, it'll tell me how big I need my inverter to be. But if you set a timer, or just do it in a 24-hour increment, plug this thing in, plug your freezer into it, make sure it's all like reset to 0, and just let it run for exactly 24 hours. Like set a timer on your watch and go out there and write down how many kilowatt hours that was, and then divide it by 24. And that will give you your average per hour, how many kilowatt hours. And yeah, so in 1 hour, X number of kilowatt hours, that'll give you your average, how many kilowatts or 1000 watts that your item uses. So let me give you an example. Let me keep it easy. If after 24 hours this said 24 kilowatt hours, well, the easy math would say, okay, that's 1 kilowatt. That's 1,000 watts that it's using on average. 1,000 watts times 1 hour is 1,000 watt hours times 24 hours. That would be 24 kilowatt hours. So yeah, go grab one of these and go measure your appliances. Find out what the instantaneous amount of power is. Again, if it's a motor, like a blender, I'm trying to think, what else? Refrigerator, freezer, power tools, those are huge. Those have huge inductive kickback current spikes. Yeah, you want to take whatever that instantaneous power is and multiply it by, at least 50%. You really can't go wrong with having a really big inverter. So if you had a 3,000 watt or 6,000 watt inverter, you'll only pull what you need. However, if it's not big enough and you try to run too many things at once and it can't supply it, it'll kick it off. That's also assuming that your battery can supply the energy that it needs. This battery here, for sure, like I have this battery embedded in my own system downstairs. It's a 12 volt system, a 2000 watt inverter with 800 watts of panels with a solar charge controller. And that's about the limit that you can reach on a 12 volt system. You can go with a 24 volt system where you have 2 batteries in series, a 36 volt, that's 3 batteries, or 48 volt, that's 4 batteries. There's an advantage to going with a higher voltage. I told you I reached the limit of what you can do on 12 volts, because if I'm pulling 2,000 watts at 12 volts, well, let's just pretend I'm pulling 2,400 watts at 12 volts. I'm pulling 200 amps through these super fat cables. And one thing I want to show you real quick is why high current is not good for energy efficiency. So here's another equation for power. My power loss in a cable is equal to the current squared times the resistance of the cable. So if I have one cable, this will just be some amount of resistance. But if I had two, oh cool, I have the resistance. However, if I take the same amount of power needs and I have a 24 volt battery, my current will go down in half. If I have half my current here, that means the losses that I'll have in those cables will be 1/4 of the loss. If I went to a 48 volt battery, I'd pull 50 amps on a 2400 watt load. And then that means that I would have 1/4 the amount of current compared to 12 volt, which is really 1/16 the amount of power loss in my cables. That's why 48 volt. That's why my next system is going to be a 48 volt system. Anyway, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Let me know what you think. If you thought that analogy was simple, if it was still too complicated. If you want to know more about this, I'm happy to share and teach you and help you to size and what you might need. And if you want to get something like a minimum, like a 100 watt panel and a cheap little controller and maybe a cheap little inverter so you can run something, and maybe you use the battery in your car, even though it's not the right kind of battery, I can show you what to do if you're in a really, really tight budget to have something. Anyway, I hope it helps. See ya.